I moved to New York, I guess like 2001. I was in culinary school for 9/11, so I was there downtown Manhattan right when it happened. So it was a real entry to New York, you know. I basically I moved to New York to work at Jean-Georges. Like I wanted to, that was my whole reason to move to New York, was to work at that restaurant. I guess to rewind a touch, like I went to school in Arizona State University, and studied product design. And there I basically dropped out. Food Network came out right at that time. You know, we just sit around, smoke weed all day, watch Food Network, and try to be like Mario Batali and Bobby Flay, you know? Anyway, it's like we just loved food. We cooked all the time. When I dropped out of school, I was just trying to think about what am I interested in? And all my interests were encapsulated in restaurants, you know? I loved industrial design, that's what I studied. So that's in the furniture and the silverware and the plates and interior design of the restaurant, architecture of the space, being artistic, you know, all those things were my interests. And, you know, and I realized that, you know, I at the time I got a quick job at this place called Pita Jungle, and it was the first kitchen I ever worked at, and it was to basically just make some money. And you know, but that's when I realized sense of urgency was so important. I had to be quick to get the food out, and that was gone. That went against my you know, my architecture school, or having to these huge projects that we're due in a month. You know, the order came in, I had to prepare the food, and that was it, you know? And so, you know, I enjoyed that, and I thrived in that, in that fashion. And so, you know, from there, I knew I wanted to go to culinary school, and so I had a quick, instance of, you know, I moved to Texas to kind of get out of Arizona, and I worked for this woman in this little tiny Belgian French bistro. This woman at this restaurant, who I worked for, she showed me these cookbooks, and one of the cookbooks was Jean-Georges Cooking at Home with a 4-star chef. And I looked through the book, and it was pictures of Central Park, and pictures of all the chefs in their tall hats, and the dining room, and the silver, and the cloches over the food. And I was just this is wild. This is what I want to, you know, I want to work in a place like this. And, you know, I was I want to move to New York. I want to go to culinary school. I want to continue my passion in this. And I ended up going to the French Culinary Institute in Lower Manhattan. And when I was there, my first week, I asked for the phone number to Jean-Georges restaurant, and they gave it to me. I called it. Someone answered the phone. It was Greg Brainin, who became my culinary mentor. And he just answered the phone. He's like, "Hello." And I said, "Is this Jean-Georges Kitchen?" And he's like, "Yes." And I'm like, "Can I come and be an intern? I want to work." He's like, "Come tomorrow, bring a chef's knife, a paring knife, and a peeler. Be here tomorrow at this time." And I was like, you know, and so I did. And that was getting my foot in the door, which then got me to meet these guys, meet Greg, meet Jean-Georges. And my culinary career with Jean-Georges started with that internship. And I started peeling garlic, peeling onions, basic intern stuff. And, you know, from there I kept my head down and work the line, work a station. And, you know, they basically threw me into the fire. And, you know, I basically just tried to okay, do my best, try to get the most out of this, try not to, you know, upset anyone too much. And I kept wanting to be moved to the upstairs kitchen, you know, the main dining room kitchen. And I think after a year of working downstairs, they finally moved me upstairs. And I worked that hot app station that I showed you. That was my first station upstairs. And it's probably one of the hardest stations, because it was just you had to do so many of there's a tasting menu, and the first 3 dishes off the tasting menu came off of that station. So you'd have to juggle all these tables, all these orders. Super stressful. I swear I have post-traumatic stress syndrome from that experience. And I still have nightmares today, or like dreams about working that station, And so, I just, like Greg, I was always like so afraid of Greg Brainin, and like he was the chef de cuisine at the time, and I was always so afraid of him. And until it got to the point where I realized that, like, okay, don't fuck up. Just like, if he tells you did something wrong, don't make that mistake again. And with that, it's like my fear of him went away, and I just got as close as I could to him. And, with that, it's like he became my mentor. Like, I stuck with him, and I, started working every station in the restaurant, and I got to be really good, like a really good line cook. And, I then became a manager. So it's like the transition from a line cook to a manager. I had to then manage people, manage the team, do the hardest recipes. And, that I guess showed them enough that they wanted to take me to a new restaurant, Perry Street. And so with Perry Street, it was a new restaurant downtown, and so they asked me to go and help them open that restaurant. So it was Greg and I basically doing all the like R&D together. Greg was leading it. I wasn't that experienced yet to like do all that on my own, but I helped him through all the R&D, and we built our team and opened. We got 3 stars in the New York Times. It was such like an accomplishment for us. At that time, Jean-Georges was opening all these restaurants all around, and Greg left the restaurant to help him open these restaurants and hotels and stuff. And so they asked me to be the chef de cuisine. So I took over, and, that's when I pushed my own recipe creation and presented those dishes to Greg and Jean-Georges, and was able to get my recipes on the menu, and that allowed me to feel confident that I could create food, and they helped me through it all. And the Michelin Guide came out in New York at that time, and that was the first time. My first taste of Michelin was then Perry Street got a Michelin star. I was the chef de cuisine, and I'd like many of the dishes were my creations at the time, and it was just like, I didn't even kind of process how important that was until now, but had a Michelin star, and, I was the chef there for 3 years, and Jean-Georges kept blowing up bigger and bigger, and hotels were after him to put his restaurants inside them. And so from there, it was a lot of, they needed help traveling. They needed help with training chefs on the road. And so they asked me to come on. And they told me they chose me because they thought my palate was closest to Greg and Jean-Georges. It was so like crazy for me to think, and it was such an honor. And I was so proud to feel that. But like, I learned that all from them, And, from there, it's like I traveled with them. So I did 15 restaurant openings in 3 years. And so all around the world, from Istanbul, Doha, Qatar, to Hawaii, Las Vegas, Cabo, Mexico, Atlanta, Utah, Vancouver, and just on the road all the time, and the whole time it was just like, I loved it. It was so exciting, and it was so hard. It was a real like, ebb and flow of emotions with being on the road for so many days, that I just started to dream of opening my own place, and in Las Vegas, there was a wood-burning grill, and I thought it was so special how it made the food taste. After working for Jean-Georges, I kind of took a couple weeks off, watched the World Cup, enjoyed soccer, and I'd go to this bar, and across the street from the bar was this restaurant called Roman's, and it was an Italian restaurant, like farm-to-table stuff, and it was so delicious, and I couldn't understand why it was so good, and I was so intimidated by the food, and I'd never tasted anything like that, even with all my Jean-Georges restaurants, that I'd worked at, and flavors and dishes I'd prepared. I never, understood that, and finally, I'd had enough. World Cup ended. I needed to get a job doing something. And I went into the restaurant, and I was like, I want to talk to the chef. I'd met him a couple times before, and I'm like, I want I want to work here. And he's like, why? You know, he knew my like culinary background. He's like, why do you want to work here? I'm like, I'm intimidated by the food. I don't understand it. And so he said, okay, come and work for, you know, do a trail, see what you think. And so my first day to trail there, he's like, I'm going to put you on the oven station. So I'm thinking it's just an oven, like a regular gas oven, you know, underneath 6 burners and, you know, and so I didn't quite understand that. And so when he walked me into the kitchen, the oven was a wood burning kitchen or wood burning oven. And I was like, oh my God, that's why. Because it was never advertised that it was a wood fired restaurant, you know, but all their meats and things, if they had a ragu for a pasta sauce, they'd cook the meat in the wood burning oven. So like the food had a little subtle smokiness to it, which is what I couldn't quite grasp, you know, without knowing it. And from there, it was like, that was like the light bulb went off, and that was like, okay, like, you know, they finished everything with really good olive oil, and they squeezed lemon on stuff and used anchovies in sauces and capers in salsa verde and all these like just classic Italian ingredients. And with an Italian background, like, you know, my dad's Italian, you know, it's like, that's been a part of my culinary upbringing forever. And it was like, it like clicked for me to like want to cook Italian food, you know? And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to look for a location to open a restaurant. And I started looking for a spot, and I found this old automotive parts store that was shuttered, and it had all these renderings of automotive parts on the outside of it. A huge liquor, like vintage liquor sign, neon liquor sign on the corner. And I was so like, I'm like, this is perfect. And I was thinking like, you know what? I'd always talk to my friend Todd about Speedy Romeo and opening a bar called Speedy Romeo, because he was telling me about the picture of the horse. And, you know, I was like, this would be a perfect place for a restaurant. And what if we called it Speedy Romeo, used that name, did Italian food, Romeo, Speedy, automotive parts store, like everything fits in this narrative. And so I'm like, we got in touch with the landlord, we rented the place, and from there it was like, can we put wood burning equipment in here? Because I wanted, for working it with Jean-Georges for so long, I wanted to tie my hands behind my back to not cook recipes like him, because so many folks had worked for him in the past and done like just rip-off recipes, stuff he'd already done, and say it was theirs. And like, I just didn't want to do that, you know? I wanted to have my own, I wanted to do my own food and be creative. And so to open with only a wood burning grill, only a wood burning oven, and produce all the food out of that, no gas in the kitchen, was like my way to do my food. And we built it, we created it. Pizzas out of the wood burning oven, steaks and seafood off the grill. And it was just like a hit off the start, and like a neighborhood institution off the bat. There was really nothing over there at the time when we opened. And so like the neighborhood really embraced it, and it just was a hit, you know? And like such a special, all those special flavors that I'd taken from like the steakhouse in Las Vegas with the wood burning grill, and the pizza, the wood burning oven from Romans, to then do pizza out of that. Like I brought everything together and did Italian food to kind of tie in my ancestry, you know? So it worked. It was great. You know, it's like, it's still there. It's, you know, proud to say we had some changes with the equipment, but it's like, it's still Italian, and it's still pizza, and it's pasta now. But, you know, from there, it's like, I've always loved Mexico. You know, when I was in high school, I studied Spanish. I went to Mexico on like sort of like a little exchange student program quickly for like, stayed with a Mexican family when I was in high school, and always loved Mexico and always loved Mexican food. And like the wood fire was so special that I wanted to do wood-fired, wood-burning Mexican food off these wood-burning grills. And so another friend of mine who'd always wanted to open a restaurant, Chris Walton, we grew up together in Kansas City. And he wanted to open a restaurant, and it's called Oxomoco. You know, it was you know, sort of my love letter to Mexico, to, you know, because when I was in Arizona, we'd go down to Nogales to just hang out, party, have fun. You know, we went to Tijuana, like I'd been to Mexico City, been to Oaxaca a bunch, and made friends, and, you know, and working in kitchens, to work with so many Spanish speaking folks, and like, you know, my Spanish thrived with working with, you know, the Mexican like workforce that lives in New York City. And so, you know, to kind of write this love letter to, you know, Mexico and create this restaurant was so special to me. And like the wood-fired flavors off the grill was so impressive, and, you know, it's just like something I wanted to do. So like we opened, it was a huge success again, and within 5 months of opening, we got a Michelin star, you know, and it wasn't the plan at all. It was just like, let's make great food. You know, let's use the wood burning equipment like I'd done at Speedy Romeo, and it just turned out great, you know, and it's, you know, I'm so proud to have the Michelin star. It's like amazing to achieve that. It wasn't our goal, which is crazy. We just wanted to make good food, but, you know, it's just what I'd learned to, like, you know, like wrap it all up. It's just like the way I learned to cook with working with Jean-Georges and Greg, and the flavor profiles and the way to put food on the plate, I just applied that to Italian food, a pasta dish, a pizza, a taco, you know, all the stuff that I love so much. I just did it in the same way they did it, and that's a recipe for success, you know. So that's pretty much it. That's the culinary background, you know. And now I've moved to now, you know, the newest chapter is, you know, moved to Norway. Norwegian wife, 2 Norwegian boys, you know, and with that, it's, you know, I want to show the world what I've learned with creating recipes, what I've learned with wood-fired cooking, what I've learned with being a dad, you know, a husband, being a son to my parents, you know, to all those things that are family, to kind of wrap it up in a show called Family Meal. And then to, you know, do camping with Patur, and to, you know, cook with wood fire outside, and, you know, and Goosebumps. Like I love, you know, it's like Goosebumps for me. It's like, it's always been, you hear a good song, you get goosebumps, you know, like I eat an incredible dish, or I create something that just really works as a recipe, or when one of the chefs at the restaurant present a dish to me that's perfect, it's like I get goosebumps. It's that, like, you know, that higher power, if you will, that's, you know, the inspiration that comes from creation is so powerful that, you know, I hope I can transfer some of that to what I put on film, you know? So here we are. That's why I'm doing this. Anyway, thanks for listening.